Are you new to Blood Bowl 3 or a returning player to Blood Bowl and wanting to get caught up on the rules and how the game plays? I'm Controlled Chaos, and in this video we're going to be going over the basics of Blood Bowl 3. Let's go ahead and get into it. First, let's talk about stats. There's 5 stats every player has. First off is movement. The higher the number this is, the better. And the reason being is it determines how many squares that player can move. That's very important. You'll see dwarves have a very low movement number, so they don't move as far, whereas Skavens have high movement numbers and they can move really far, which is nice. Now let's move on to strength. Strength is predominantly used when combating another player. The player with the higher strength gets the choice of what rolled. They get to determine and pick if multiple dice are out there, but we'll talk more about that in the gameplay part of this video. Next, I want to talk about agility. The lower the agility, the better. You want as low of a score of agility on a player as you can possibly have. And this counts for many things. You need to do an above agility check for multiple things. Picking up the ball, catching the ball, running beyond the normal movement a couple of squares, and also getting out of tackle zones. You have to do a dodge. And sometimes those tackle zones can be very tricky. And once again, we'll talk more about that in the gameplay section. Next is passing. This is another number you want really low. And the reason being is you have to roll above that number. And with passing, it's literally just passing the ball. So for most teams, this isn't that important unless you're playing a team where you're going to be passing the ball around, which isn't big a thing in Blood Bowl 3, but can help out if that's the direction you're wanting to take your team. Once again, we'll talk more about that in the gameplay. Then there's the armor value. You want your armor value to be as high as possible, because when a player gets knocked down, there is an armor check. And the higher the armor value, the higher the roll needs to be. Which means that if it doesn't pass the armor, nothing happens to the player and they're just downed. If it goes beyond the armor for the armor roll, then there's an injury roll that is done. Now I want to talk about the skills. There are a lot of skills in this game, and I'm not going to go through every skill in this video. I'm just going to give references. If you hover over each skill, it will tell you what it does and what stats it affects or what effects it actually has. But you have different skills. You have the general skills, you have the strength skills, you have agility skills, you have passing skills, and you have mutations. Now, mutations only happen with certain teams, such as the Chaos team or the Skaven teams. They get mutations. You will not have mutations on Elf team or Human team or Dwarf team. What you're looking for is, like, for instance, in general, you'll have block or sure hands. And what block lets you do is it allows you to negate a both down roll, which is really good. And we'll talk about the both down roll in gameplay. The sure hands makes it so that you can re-roll the dice when you go to pick up the ball. So if you fail the first roll, you get a re-roll and hopefully succeed. But then you have other skills such as in agility, you have dodge, and this makes it so that you can do a re-roll on getting out of a tackle zone, which is good. And then you have things like pass for when you are passing the ball. And this, once again, makes it so that if you fail a pass roll, you get to re-roll it again. I forgot to mention strength. Strength has Mighty Blow. And what Mighty Blow does is when you actually beat a armor roll and you're going to do the damage, this adds to that role, so you have a better chance of actually knocking out, injuring, or killing the other player. Then mutations. There are a lot of mutations in the game. The one I picked out for this example is claws. You have a good chance of negating armor roll, which is really nice. Now, these skills are set in 3 different types of ways. You have primary skills, secondary skills, and then there's some where you just can't get any skills in that area. All of them do have access to the general skills. Some of them, most of them, don't have access to things like mutations, or some players may not have access to passing, things like that. So you want to look into stuff like that when choosing your team. Now, when talking about picking your team, there's several different types you can look at. You have your beat 'em up bruisers, which are all about hitting the opponent, tackling the opponent, doing as much damage. Then you have the passing teams and the ball running teams, where they get really good at throwing the ball and running down the ball and scoring in the game. Then you have these teams that are a mishmash of all that stuff, or you have teams that just really aren't set for anything. They don't have any catchers, they don't have any throwers, they don't have any runners, and it's your job to give them those skills. So you need to level them up. What you pick is determined on the play style you want to play. You want to take a look and read at what each team is good for. Skavens are good for running the ball. So are the Eldar. The dwarves and the orcs are great at being a bashing team. Same with chaos, but the difference with chaos is they're more of a mold the build the way you want, but they're very strong. So most players mold a chaos team into a bashing team. Then you have humans, which are even across the board on everything and don't really have much. Yeah, they have some catchers, they have some throwers, so you have the option to move that way, but you can also build them to be a bashing team. Let's go ahead and talk about gameplay. When you're playing the game, there's a lot of things you're going to be seeing when actually playing a match. Let's first talk about the play field itself. It is a rectangular football type field, American style football field. And when a player gets put to the edge and pushed off the edge, instead of them just getting knocked down and getting up and going back into the field, what ends up happening is the crowd will go in and beat up on that player, and there's a chance for injury or death or knockout there. So a lot of the times you don't want to have your players pushed up against the edge of the field. It is a bad placement to have. Every so often it is worth taking that risk, but you have to be careful and strategic of when you do it and how you do it. You want to make sure that's not going to be easy for the enemy to knock that player out of the field. The other thing you want to look at is when you're doing movement. You're going to see the space where you can move, and there'll be a blue lines showing the border area of where that player can move. And 2 squares before that border line, sometimes 3s, if you take certain skills, you're going to see exclamation points at those 2 to 3 spots. What that represents is every time a player runs into those exclamation point spots, they're going to have to roll an agility test. If they fail the agility test, they go down. And that's very important. Now, speaking of going down, every time on your turn when a player goes down, it's an immediate turnover, which means it immediately becomes the other player's turn. So you do not want to get knocked down. Other things that can cause turnovers is a failed pass, a failed catch will also do the same effect. When we continue on talking about movement. You want to be careful how you move around the board because you'll see colored spots around the enemy players. And these colored spots vary from green to yellow to orange to red. And these are tackle zones. And the colors are very important because if you pass through a green area, you're going to have to roll a dodge test. If you go through a yellow area, it's going to be a bit tougher and it's going to add +1 to the roll that's needed for the test. So if you have, for instance, let's say a character that has a 2+ agility and you go through a green area, it's going to need to be a 2 or better roll. If you go through a yellow area, you're going to need a 3 or better roll. Then when it's orange, you're going to need 4 or better. If it's red, you're going to need 5 or better. There's another instance with this. Let's say you see an avenue where it's all green area highlighted of the playfield, and that's the only way through. For each space that you run into of that green, you're going to need to add a +1 to the roll needed for that. So if you have 3 spaces that you need to go through, the first one's just a regular dodge roll. Then it's a +1 after that, then another +1 after that, and then another +1 to get after that. So that could be a 5 or better roll that you need if you have an agility of that 2+. And that's just an example of how that works. So what most players do is they try to find the areas where there is no tackle zone to maneuver their players around. And the only real time you want to go into a tackle zone is when you're wanting to lock up another player, or you just need to skate by and you have a very agile character that can get away with that kind of thing. You don't want to take your strength players that have low agility and run them through because strength doesn't play into that effect. Let's talk about the dice. There's 2 types of dice that you're rolling. There's 6-sided dice and then there's dice with icons. The 6-sided dice are for the skill checks that we were talking about. The passing, the catching, the running beyond a certain amount that your character normally moves, the getting out of tackle zones, stuff like that, along with other event things that happen at the start of the turn or the round, should I say. Also rolls for doing armor breaks and determining the damage taken if the armor is broken. But when doing an attack, there are icon dice that you have to roll. And these icon dice are very important. If is an arrow, it just means that that player is going to get pushed. If, however, it is what looks like sort of an explosion or like a POW sign that you see in comic books, that means that the person that's being hit is going to go down. If it is that POW sign with an exclamation point, that means that the player tripped that is being hit. However, if the player has dodge, it turns into a push instead of a down. Then there is the POW sign with a skull. That means both downs. That means both players will fall and hit the ground. If a player has block, the player with block will not go down. So if both players have block, neither player will go down. Then there is the skull. The skull means that the attacker goes down, not the defender. And that's important there. Another thing you need to know about the dice is if you have dice that have these red chains going horizontally across them, that means that the defending player gets to choose what dice is picked from the rolls. However, if you see horizontal and vertical dice, that means it's a step higher and you need to adjust what you're doing to be able to correctly hit that player without the defending player choosing. Now, you're probably wondering, well, how do you determine how many dice there are and how to get so that the dice are in your favor? And the way that's worked out in this game is simple. If you have a character that you're wanting to attack and it's 1 dice or it's the dice with the chain, you just need to have another player be in the tackle zone of the player that you want to hit and adjacent to them. The more players you have around, they add a +1 to your benefit of the strength, and this will increase it. Now, if the total strength of your person hitting along with all of the adjacent players you have against that one player are doubles the amount of strength with all those pluses of the defending player, you will get 3 dice. If it is equal to the strength, it'll be 1 dice. If it is 1 or 2 plus above, you'll get 2 dice. And then the same with the other direction, except it's adding those horizontal and vertical chains on there, letting you know you need to add more men or you definitely don't want to do this. Now, once again, higher strength in doing the attacks is better. It will serve you better because a dwarf going against an elf when attacking will have that double dice or at least 1 dice and things like that. Whereas if the elf was attacking the dwarf, they would have the dice with the horizontal chains on it. But if that elf got 3 of his buddies on that dwarf, then guess what? That would put in your favor for the attack if you're the attacking person with the elves. When you're playing with passing teams, you want to move around and stay away and pick off guys that are in the corners and not covered by a bunch of other guys on the opposite team. The bashing teams, you want to stop the teams with the movement and play the ball game from getting past your tackle zone. You're trying to keep them from making a touchdown. And if you get the opportunity to pick up the ball or have the ball, you want to slowly move it to make a touchdown, because the way this game is determined is by the player who has the most amount of touchdowns, and it only needs to be by 1. There is a draw capabilities where if you both get the same score or neither you were able to score, it's a draw game. Now, most games are played out in a total of 16 turns. However, if on that 16th turn it comes to a draw, it will do another 8 turns, or sometimes the first player that scores is how that plays out. So you do, even as a bashing team, want to play the ball, but you're playing tactics differently. You're playing stalling tactics where you're holding on to the ball and defending heavily the ball carrier and then bashing on the enemy. And then when it gets close to time being ran out, you'll then go ahead and score the ball. So you'll see some players that will keep the ball carrier right on the edge of the touchdown area to where they could do it in 1 turn. And they'll hold them there for multiple turns using their other guys just to beat up on your guys. If you run into problems like this, you need to figure out how to play around this. You need to maneuver and split them up or take them out one by one. You really need to use your brain to break the stronger team apart. Whereas the bashing team really doesn't have to worry about that as much if they keep their guys together. There is one last thing I want to let you guys know about this gameplay. If a player is down once per turn, you can foul a down player. However, there are some things about fouling. First off, when you do a foul, there's an armor check that's done. And if you roll doubles, you're caught, and that player is sent off the field for the rest of the game. Another way that they can get caught is, let's say the armor break goes through and it's going into damage. If you roll doubles on the damage, you're also caught and the player is sent off the team. There are things that can mitigate this though. And those things are when you are setting up your skills, in there is a sneaky get skill. It is an agility skill. You get that skill. It makes it so that when you roll doubles on the armor check, it does not cause a red flag and send your player off. They're only sent off if you get doubles on the damage. The other thing you can do is at the start of the match, before you even get into the play field, you're given the option to buy some things. And these things are, you could buy a keg of beer, which reduces the chances of knockouts happening. You can buy more apothecaries, which are really good. You can buy more rerolls, which are really good. You can buy a wizard that will send down a fireball and do damage to a player. Fans and cheerleaders, which affect the rules at the beginning of each round, and stuff like that. There's also bribing the ref. You can pay to bribe the ref, which makes it so that that red card does not happen. You can, and then there's also one where if someone's bribed the ref, you can get a fair ref one, which negates a bribe the ref. So it's playing the front end of the game and saying that all up before is very, very important in what you choose. And that's really nice. Now, you're probably asking, how do I level up these players to get more skills? Well, you get star points. The way you get star points is by doing many different things. The first off is when you injure an opponent's player, you will get star points. When you throw the ball and do a pass, you get star points if it's successful. When you catch the ball, that player gets star points for catching the ball. When a player does a touchdown, they get star points for doing the touchdown. And if a player becomes an MVP of the game, they get star points. Then you just build up those star points until you get the star points you need to get the skill you want. If you found this video helpful, please hit that like button and subscribe if you're not subscribed. Have a great day.